Welcome everybody to our Export Essentials workshop and event today. We're just going to wait for a few moments for folks to join us. I can see the numbers jumping up really quickly. So you can see all our lovely faces. You can hear a little bit more about us in a second when I do the proper introduction. So just waiting as people join us today. So I can see 24 people in already. Ah, great, and I can see people's names as well. So it's great to see Will here and Simon, Margaret, hi. Jamie, Gary, David, Craig, some really good names. Quite a few names I recognise here. Great to see you with us. Hello to Jill and to Ian. I'm just going to wait a few more moments and then we will make a start. Okay, so folks are still gradually joining us, but we will make a start to today's seminar. So welcome everybody to BHP's Export Essentials workshop and seminar. We have got an amazing panel of speakers for you today. I've spent quite a bit of time with them in the run up to this event, and I can tell you most definitely from first-hand experience that they are experts in this area. They actually labelled themselves in our little warm-up session before today went live as export geeks. So I'm going to pick that one up and share that with you all now. So in no particular order, but the first of our brilliant panelists is Victoria Boldison. Victoria is the founder and chief exec of Bolst Global. She's a multi-talented, multilingual, award-winning chartered marketeer. So that's a tongue twister if ever there was one. Victoria launched Bolst Global to help ambitious food, drink and supplement companies to grow overseas. And she has a roster of very well-known global food clients, some of which are based in Yorkshire and you would know really well. So we might get to hear who some of those are a bit later. We've got Silvia Trachi as the UK manager for YSDS. I have learnt through my conversations with Silvia that YSDS stands for Your Special Delivery Service. And they specialise in shipping specialist items globally. And so she's got lots of interesting stories to tell about the kind of things that she's been asked to ship, a few of which we heard about earlier this week. She's got 2 decades of experience as a logistics specialist and previously held positions in FMCG companies in the EU and the US. We've got James Hausman, who's our senior manager in the tax team at BHP. James previously worked at McLaren, which I haven't had an opportunity to talk to you about in a great amount of detail, but an interesting past, which we did talk a little bit about car panels earlier this week, but I think more that we could learn from him on that, where he was the tax manager, and before that he was at KPMG. So great to have a tax specialist with us today, because I know that's top of the list in terms of concerns for quite a few people around their export capability. We have Paul Blackman, who is our resident export geek and consultant at BHP. He's a senior business improvement consultant and specialises in export, logistics, manufacturing and retail improvement. And it's very much thanks to Paul that we've all come together today to share our experience. And lastly, but by no means least, we've got James Wakely, who's Operations Director of Just Kampers, another one of my favourite types of organisations, because they specialise in the VW after sales market, which is something that I'm quite interested in. So he's an expert in e-commerce and B2C global markets. And he said and has been known to say frequently that Brexit is best described as a challenge to overcome. And we're pretty much going to prove that today in our panel. So we are going to be spending some time getting under the skin of some of the export challenges that SMEs have got at the moment. And there are many of those. We spent some time earlier this week talking through the sort of full range of what those might be, and couldn't come to an exhausted list even in an hour because there's so much to talk about. So we're going to come on and hopefully answer some of your questions at the end of this workshop. But in the first session, we're actually going to run through some questions to our panelists to uncover some of their expertise and knowledge. Before we do that, we have a poll which we're going to share. So we've got the amazing Katie in the background who is helping to host this event, and she's going to surface the poll for us now, I hope. So we are wanting to know from you, how export confident are you at the beginning of this seminar? 1 is, no, I'm not very confident at all, and 5 is very, and you could be anything on that scale. There's no wrong or right answer. So if you could answer that now, that would be brilliant. And I notice it says panelists, we can't vote, so we'll just have to pause while everybody else does that. So we'll come back to you with an answer on that a bit later. So Katie, if we could take that down, if a reasonable number of folks have answered it. Great stuff. I'm now going to hand over to Paul, who's going to give us, we get an answer straight away. So a lot of people in that mid-range there at 59% saying neither confident nor lacking in confidence. So I think we can aim to push that up a little bit as we go through this this seminar today, and we'll check in on that at the end of the seminar. So Paul, over to you. I was hoping to hear from you a little bit of a summary of what does the export market look like at the moment? What are some of the challenges you're hearing from your clients?
Okay, thank you, Helen, and an excellent introduction. Welcome, everybody. I thought I'd do a little bit of a scene set and try not to make this too heavy, but the general position is that we're sort of nearly three months into the process. That we've got further advised changes in April and July, and against that, the flavour of the UK government is extending some timelines and perhaps maintaining attitudes in some areas that are not always supported by the EU 27 member states. So the consensus amongst many, and I would say myself, is that we're certainly going to maintain the rough ride for product related things going forward. So that should be the backdrop, really. You know, it's going to be still rough and difficult. So moving on from January this year, the perception of many businesses, and I think those who are not specialists in it, was that it was going to be business as usual with a free trade agreement, and we should be able to get through this, but it's a bit different. This is not quite the reality. Let's be diplomatic about that. The UK arrangement is a trade and cooperation agreement with defined requirements, and no doubt our panel will be adding very much here, and that's going to be the subject. So in addition to all of this, the EU member states have imposed a number of different and often inconsistent domestic arrangements at their borders, which has equally created tensions and difficulties. Therefore, it's incredibly difficult to make consistent statements on solving issues. However, there are ways to best prepare, and that's something we need to keep in our minds. There are ways to get through this. So against this, the UK government strategy is to grow international trade, but with now an increasing emphasis on promoting services, as it's a large part of our economy. So the considered view of many, and I certainly include myself in this, is that here and in the UK, the business community will find a way of making this work and happen, often by negating and circumventing the views of politicians. So again, against this, as a sort of shaping thing, Helen and I have created a tailored and very practical range of courses aimed at helping, but there's much more on that later. So we're all looking to make the best of it, looking to thrive and maximize the potential in world trade. So over to you, Helen, and Thank you. Helen, you're on mute if you don't know.
Schoolgirl error, thanks, Paul. I need Paul to keep me on the straight and narrow. So with that in mind, and given the fact that the export environment is changing quite quickly from week to week, and certainly we've had conversations about the emphasis on different matters inside the export arena as we've come through Brexit, we are going to go on to some questions from our panelists. So I'm really interested and excited to hear what they've got to say. I'm going to make sure that we get the most out of the next half an hour in terms of hearing what they have to say, and then we're going to open up some questions from the floor. So I'm going to turn to James first, James W, and ask the question, what's been your biggest challenge post-Brexit?
Our biggest challenge post-Brexit has been to actually, I would say, mitigate our revenue stream loss into Europe. We could have looked at Brexit as being an opportunity or a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. About 15% of our business is European export. And so for us was protecting that and we looked at it on an 80-20 rule. So how did we protect 80% of our business immediately? And then as the environment or the landscape changed, how we then, I would say, gathered back the remaining 20%. So we made a concise decision to protect the 80%, and we did that through three metrics, which were three decision processes: was look after our major trade customers, and then look after our two major trading regions, which were Germany and France. So we protected those to begin with, and now we're ever evolving what we're doing to actually trying to, I'll say, recoup the remaining. So that's been the biggest challenge for us.
And was it helpful, James, to concentrate just on two regions like that to start with?
100%, especially with the couriers. So a lot of us is, so we're using pallet services and parcel delivery services. So obviously one of the majors concentrated on those territories because they're actually from that territory. So it was a lot easier to gain the, I would say, the take up of those two regions. And then from we're using something called limited fiscal representation. And I'll do more about that later, but we're using limited fiscal rep to actually move our pallet services via one route, which enabled us to literally ensure we could get the route cleared and all customs clearance and deliveries on time. So within the first week, we were about 10 days from point to point, which was great for us.
Yeah. So. Excellent. And just so we don't lose the thread of that, can you just explain in like one or two sentences what limited fiscal rep is?
So limited fiscal, we've appointed, limited fiscal takes away your filing requirements in the territory where you're importing those goods into. So we've got fiscal limited rep in the Netherlands. So our courier is a Dutch-based courier. So we're using they're routing the goods into Netherlands. They're clearing the goods using limited fiscal representation, and then resupplying them under EC intra-community sales into Germany and France. So that we have one route, so only one tax regime to deal with, which is in at the moment.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it kind of segues nicely into going to Silvia next, I think. Does James's experience resonate with you? And is there anything else you can share that you're hearing from your customers in terms of the biggest challenges?
Thank you, Helen. Yes, absolutely. I was listening very interested in James' experience, and it seems that him and his team took really smart decisions considering the circumstances to focus on key areas and try to limit the old way of shipping to consumer, which was just shipping wherever and having standard transit times, which are not reliable anymore. And I think for us, it's important to explain to our clients, to the consumer, that as challenging as this is for all of you, it is also from the logistics side, because we too are facing changes and requirements, and every day is a little bit different than the other. So when focusing on a specific route, like in James' example, or seeking fiscal representation, that helps streamlining the process and trying to mitigate the risks. We actually just completed a similar example with one of our partners where we used our office in the Netherlands. The partner, so the company actually is registering for VAT as well there, so that they can import their goods into Europe and then distribute them from there. It's clearly a process that takes time and has costs, but they were at the point where they couldn't ship anymore into Europe. They had a very heavy flow of e-commerce, and they just didn't have the manpower to process all these orders, go and pay all the duties and VAT at destination, deal with every single customs in every single country, provide information over and over again. And this way, they found a temporary, hopefully for the long term as well, solution. So I think it's a case-by-case way of working for us, where every client might have different requirements and different needs, but studying their trends and making them focus to where it's more important or where they see continuous business, keeping them calm and trying to come up together with the best solution and trying to overcome this period of confusion is definitely the best way. And it's definitely been a little bit more challenging than expected.
Yeah, thanks, Silvia. And I know, Paul, limited fiscal rep and being really focused around your activities are some of the things that we've built into the workshops that we're launching in April. But can you tell us what other challenges you're hearing at the moment from your clients post-Brexit?
Yes, indeed. And I echoing the points of James and Silvia particularly, I think the challenges are all centered around change. And I think that change has been that many businesses are having to learn and understand things that they'd never actually learned and understood before, and probably never heard. You know, the whole discussion around commodity codes, what do they mean, what do they do, what do they allow you to do, has been quite revealing for many. And I suppose that subject is one which will resonate heavily, I'm sure, with Silvia, and I'm sure with Jamie, because it drives the whole process. Second along that line is this general need to understand Incoterms. Again, most people go, what on earth's one of those? You know, and for those who don't live in the logistics world as most of us do, that would be something that never heard of or never considered. But without using the correct Incoterms, which is international commercial terms is the right way to say that, you don't define your trade, you don't define your regulation, you don't define your opportunities, and particularly you don't derive the most benefit from international trade. So as a headline, Helen, it's the realization of what has changed and what you need to do about the change. So
okay. And what I'm hearing from that is Incoterms and commodity codes, two of the biggest buzzwords. I think I'm going to flip over to Victoria now, because I could see you nodding vigorously there. Victoria, I guess you get to have those conversations quite frequently with your customers.
Yeah, for sure at the moment. And as Paul said, I mean, going back to what Silvia was mentioning as well earlier on the side of things, with a view on obviously my take from the food and drink perspective, the challenge we've seen for a lot of companies, and particularly in the SME space, has been around the presence of an EU presence. And obviously from a food labelling perspective, that's a legal requirement to now have in the food industry what they call an FBO, a food business operating address, or if not, a address on the packaging that has an EU, it's geographically located within the EU. And there's been some decision making and thought processes that companies have had to go through, suppliers who do they want to effectively have a setup within the EU themselves, and all the implications that Silvia mentioned in terms of time and cost and extra admin to deal with that, the fiscal side of things, or is there an option to work through some of their, if they have existing partners and obviously distributors or customers in the EU member member states, is there an option to put that address on their packaging and sell it that way? Now, that also has implications with, I think, if you're looking from a more strategic and from a sales perspective, having certain signaling through that who you're obviously working with in those markets can be both seen as a good and a bad thing, and depending on what your strategy is from one business to another as how they want to operate within those markets, exclusively, non-exclusively, that's thrown up a number of questions as to what is the best way to do it. And again, like we said, case by case basis, every business is different, and how they want to go around doing that fits best their strategy and their current infrastructure and ways of working. Building on what Paul said, the Incoterms side of things and the implications of what you select and how you want to trade with your customers is huge. And for people that obviously have worked outside of the EU, more au fait with that, but certainly getting that wrong can have huge implications in terms of impacting your value chain, the level of risk and responsibility. And obviously with the disruption we're seeing through the supply chains and logistics side of things, if you're trading on an Incoterm which makes you liable as an importer of record, or as having to clear the goods and pay those duties and customs, then that's complex. And a lot of, certainly on the direct to consumer side of things, people obviously not necessarily wanting to get involved with that or just can't. So yeah, there's lots to go at. I think the last point I'd want to make in terms of certainly on the food and drink side, the rules of origin as well has been something that there's been a bit of a minefield in terms of, again, can a product obviously be classed as UK, and can it have that preferential rate? And also within that, composite products as well, are they needing health certificates, export health certificates, which again for people trading with the EU is completely new and something they're not aware of. And anecdotally, I was speaking to somebody last week, and even the retailers in Ireland were giving completely different conflicts. One retailer telling the supplier they needed a health certificate because of the composite nature of their product, and for the exact same product with a completely different retailer in Ireland being told they didn't. So it's still unclear, and we are still working through this.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I thought it was a really good important point there about working with partners and sort of mobilising your network and your connections to help you navigate through the export market. But I'm guessing, James H., that has tax implications as well. Is that something you've experienced, or what are the sort of big tax questions that you're hearing at the moment around export?
Well, taking a step back, so we've got this new process now. There's essentially two new pieces of paper that are needed in a supply chain that weren't previously required when you sold things to Europe, of being an export and an import document. Export document, if you're an exporter out of the UK, fairly straightforward. You need your quantity code, need a few codes on there, but I won't get into details. I guess the real challenging part is the import document, and that's what determines the tax. So dependent on what you put on that will determine, firstly, who pays the tax and the level of tax. So a lot of the questions I'm getting are, what's the commodity code? Not so much anymore. Most people have got these by now, but what's the right commodity code? What's a customs procedure code? What does that mean? And how do I work out my rule of origin? Which they're all fairly complex questions. And I guess in most supply chains, it is the counterpart, it's the person you're selling to who has to do them. And you've got to balance a little bit between being a supplier to these guys and then being a tax advisor in certain cases. So I'm getting people coming to me saying, my customer wants to do this, what should they be putting on their import document? And I'm going, well, you shouldn't be telling them that, really. I know commercially that goes against helping your customer out, but at the end of the day, if they get it wrong, there could be tax implications for them. And do they really want the liability sitting with their supplier potentially if they're giving them some different information? So, but getting lots of questions around, filling in the forms, basically what numbers go on them.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for that. So I'm going to turn to, has the Brexit environment changed your ambition around what you want to achieve. So, you know, do you still measure success in the export market in the same way this year as you may have done previously? And a little bit of a view on where you see this heading to in the long term. So in summary, kind of what's your vision for this year and what do you expect from it? Is that different to what you would have expected in a normal year? And then what do you see from the future? And I'm going to go to Silvia, I think, for this one to start with.
It's a really good question. We've asked this to ourselves before. We thought, you know, we're a fairly medium-sized business, so we work with the big giant players out there. As far as service providers, we support small to larger companies as far as our clients. So we always base our work on providing a consultation service, providing the best advice available at the moment for the type of goods and the destination, based on different priorities. It used to be, I want this yesterday, I want it cheap, and it needs to get there in one piece. And now it's just like, I want it there, you know, so it's changed completely. I think from the pandemic to Brexit, to arriving at the last minute, not really knowing what was going on, we prepared as much as we could with certifications, AEO statuses, training. There was a lot of training provided. However, now, because of all the challenges we all explained, we kind of go more on a day-to-day basis. So I guess our plan for the year and our hopes are to be able to support our clients as best as we can and make sure that they succeed in this challenge. As we all said, it is definitely going to be something we all can overcome. It's just a better way of creating routines and creating, you know, the best way to process paperwork, to determine Incoterms, to find if needed fiscal representation or not, to rely on shipping partners that hopefully have a presence in Europe, in different countries, so that you can always get, as Jamie said, also the other side input. What happens after goods leave the UK? Can I have feedback from customs or a customs agent in the country of destination where I'm shipping? I already saw here that everything I'm doing is correct. Is it the same over there? Just try and think ahead. So for us, it's actually been quite good because, you know, we found ourselves where possible helpful in providing, you know, the best service we can and allowing our clients to continue their relationships with Europe, which is everything we want. So I think it could be a good year.
Oh yeah. So and quickly, just generally your take on the export market. Do you see us moving through these challenges and there being opportunity?
It's a great country and it's a great exporter and importer, and you know, we've been doing it for a long time. I'm sure there will be a way around it, and I think these will be definitely the toughest times, and you know, we will eventually be able to work together and joining great companies like people on this panel today and cover all bases. So
yeah. And just because I can, I'm going to ask you what is the most unusual thing you've ever shipped?
The most unusual we ever ship, well, we do quite a lot of life science, so a lot of you know, infectious substances. Maybe you don't want to know the content sometimes. A lot of lab research materials. So
yeah, interesting. Great, thanks for that, Silvia.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, so James, getting into this is James W. Getting into the commodity side of export. Have you had to change your plans for this year, given the export environment and the challenges of the new Brexit regs?
So we haven't changed our plans. I think back to my original gambit, we've kind of, this year we see as a consolidation year. So we're saying that this year we will consolidate, and as the landscape changes, but we've also seen the Brexit as an opportunity as well, that we can actually start to identify markets where we don't currently trade with, actually source from as well, from an import perspective as well. So as well as export being an opportunity, we're also seeing import being an opportunity, and actually leveraging the domestic market where the exporter from a European basis can't actually get their product into the UK as quickly, actually opens opportunities from a UK perspective as well. So there's both sides of the opportunity is delivered. From a commodity code perspective, we have had some we have some preference origin products where we actually source the original raw materials, but we actually do fabrication in the UK, and that's thrown us up some huge questions that we have had to get answers on, and which I think the panel's alluded to as well. You get different answers from different people you ask, where the problem arises, and from different territories as well. So the product going into one territory and a customs officer's definition is completely different territory to territory, which is where it's really thrown up some huge problems from us. So yeah, the commodity code piece is, I think, is one of the biggest challenges to overcome, is the commodity code definition and the preference origin definition as well. Is the problems.
Yeah, so interesting to hear that you're seeing this as a period of consolidation, but you have a very clear line of sight on where you're heading towards.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, 2022 for us will be a growth perspective. We'll look for growth into export once we understand the land. We won't put the investment in until we understand where the landscape is. Once we understand that the opportunities there, we will then put the investment in. Yeah, so I'm going to sort of break away from the format we agreed a little bit, because a question's come in that is exactly relevant to what we're talking about now. So it seems crazy to leave that to the end. So Craig Stevenson's actually asking, for commodity codes, why do different customs agents and different customs offices decide a different code may be necessary to the generic one? And what's the risk to the business of continually changing in order for the goods to pass through in order to fit the customs agent's mood? ? So I was actually going to go to Victoria to see if she can make sense of that question. Is that something you're happy to pick up, Victoria?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think Jamie will probably be the best placed on this to answer. But my understanding is you can obviously get binding information, which will then you can basically, that can be a blanket kind of, this is the code, and we have the backing for that, which I think Jamie can probably give a bit more depth into as a solution.
Yeah. So thinking about you, see, commodity code is what goes on your import or export document. That is your document. So when Craig says that the customs agent challenges it, the customs agent is there to help you. So if they're saying that's the wrong commodity code, listen to them. But if you're confident in your classification, then that's what you should put on it. So for example, I've seen a few importers, it's mainly on import, because as I say, the import is where you're going to pay the tax, so it's where I get involved, where they've overridden what someone's told them on the import, they've advised them commodity code X, but they put Y on it, and that's incorrect. At the end of the day, it is the business that is importing it, is their document. It's up to them what they put on the import. If they get it wrong and HMRC come along, that's on them. But it makes me a bit nervous when people rely a lot on agents, because if HMRC comes sniffing and it's all wrong and they assess, your agent isn't going to pay you any additional tax or pay you for the additional tax you've got to pay HMRC. So in terms of getting comfortable with what your commodity code is, you're right, you can go for something called an advanced tariff ruling. It used to be called a binding tariff information ruling, which is where you go to HMRC and you say, we've got this product, here's a sample of it potentially, it's made of X, and we think it's commodity code whatever. And they go away, it takes 3 or 4 months to do at the minute, but they come back and go, yes, we agree with you, or no, we think it's this. And then you've got a piece of paper from HMRC there that you can hang your hat on. And I'm not sure how it'll work in the new world, given we're not all in the EU together, but there used to be, if the UK government gave it, you could use it in France, for example. And I presume that they will place some reliance and some comfort on what the Foreign Tax Authority has ruled on.
So it's great that we're getting some really real world questions coming through. This is what today's all about. And I know, Paul, commodity codes is something that you've spent a bit of time building into the workshop that you've developed for BHP. Is there anything else you want to add on commodity codes before we move on?
I can only but echo what Jamie has said, because it's so valid. But I think the other point just to remember is that international trade is a relationship base, and it's never a terrible idea to enter a conversation with your, let's say, customer supplier to understand both ways. But Jamie is absolutely right that the responsibility lays with the business that's doing the action, and that's where you've got to remember. But we are in a point of change, and I think one of the problems is going to be is that customs officers are starting to do things that they've probably never done before. You know, they've never actually had to really look at this, particularly with EU trade, and on that basis that should be considered. But in terms of commodity codes particularly, we have spent time really helping people within our sort of proposed structure of courses we're going to be doing to understand the relevance and importance. And that's echoing what Jamie was saying. You know, they are your code, but you've got to be quite clear that you're using the code properly and it's going to cover you. They are not, for the layman, they're not the most easiest thing always to understand, because they can be quite broad in their term. You know, I for example, you know, something for a burglar alarm doesn't say burglar alarm, it wraps it up into a whole range of things, of which burglar alarms become one part of. So if you're unsure, use professional advice, but follow your instinct and be clear on your argument and stick to your argument, because it's a logical process. And if in doubt, talk to a tax specialist. You know, I can't hammer the point enough. You know, I would always say professional advice. If you think it's expensive, try using amateurs.
There's a simple pro tip there as well. So I mentioned binding tariff origin rulings. There is a database. So if you can search the EU's list of when someone else has done it. So if you wanted to search on there for a burglar alarm, for example, you might find someone else has had to do it, and there'll be a ruling that a foreign tax authority is giving you for there. So you can search on them. It's got a search function.
Great stuff. Thanks for that advice, Jamie. So I'm going to come to Victoria next and get back to where do you see the future in terms of export? I know we're going through a bit of a bumpy ride at the moment, which we're helping people to navigate through this seminar, but where do you think we're heading towards, Victoria?
Well, what a few observations we've seen so far really is that within the EU, and like I mentioned before, people trading and choosing to continue to trade with the EU, I think that we will see some certain SMEs, certain other suppliers will fall off. They'll decide that actually this is too difficult, or strategically it's not important for them, because let's not forget that a lot of businesses get into exporting particularly as it's reactive opportunism for a lot of people, which is perfectly normal. They're focusing on building their home market, and then an opportunity comes knocking through the website, through being at a trade fair somewhere, etc., and they are able to turn that on and start to then think maybe we could do a bit more of this. But I think what it will do is it will focus people's minds and businesses to say, actually, is the international expansion really a serious part of our growth and strategy, and something we really do want to do? And I think the ones that say yes to that focus on it and persevere with it, will certainly win out in the long term. And I'm not just talking within the EU. I think that then, by getting to grips with what they need to do if they haven't traded elsewhere, I think it will also then give confidence. It will then, there'll be an ease in some respects, because obviously a lot of the documentation now, a lot of what they're having to get their head around now does apply into global, more far-flung markets. So in that sense, I think it will then allow the opportunity to become more global for businesses as well. I think that's also been helped by obviously all the free trade agreements that are currently in process at the moment, that in time we can benefit from. So I think it will allow those that really do want to do international to make that happen, and make that happen on a more global basis. And potentially, if there are fewer competitors in their sector trading within the EU, for example, I mean, what we've already seen is with some of our clients, the orders that we've had post transition and this quarter already have been much bigger than we expected. And actually that's been encouraging, because obviously now, rather than ordering, say, 2 pallets of product, the suppliers over are saying, well, with the same paperwork, it's the same process, there's more cost involved, let's take the full truckload now, or a full container. So we're seeing the increase coming through in terms of volume for those traders and suppliers still operating within the U and persevering.
Yeah, such good points there, Victoria. I think that, first of all, that clarity around strategically, is this important at the moment, is the first question that everybody should be asking. But it's clearly some significant opportunity if you are prepared to stay the course and see as things open up. So we are going to open up some questions in about 5 minutes. So we've got one in the waiting room, but if anybody else wants to start posting some questions, that would be great. We're going to come to you very shortly. So I'm going to sort of end our sort of panel questions with a question to all of you around what's the one piece of advice that you would give to SMEs at the moment who are trying to navigate this complex area. I've heard quite a bit about commodity codes, and I feel as though my knowledge and expertise of that has grown significantly, but it is still complicated. So, you know, if you could give one piece of advice, what would it be? So I'm going to come to Paul, I think, to start with on this one.
Okay, thank you. So much detail today. It's really good. One piece of advice is probably the most difficult question of all to ask in a subject of such complexity, but we'll go. I would paraphrase it in really to say, prepare and spend time on actually mapping out what you're trying to do, seek advice against that, and then be clear on what you are actually doing. Because if you put the time in at the front, you avoid as many issues as you possibly can towards the end of it. And we've heard about this inconsistency. So the preparation and using proper advice is absolutely key. So I'll try and limit it to that, because we could be here all day with that question, Helen. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Paul. And Silvia?
I think it's going to be all of our advice to kind of try and be as informed as you can. There are great resources out there. It's good to listen to more sources, and as Jamie said, then make your opinion about it, because it's your product or your business. But there are some good tools available. There is a trade help desk. It's called Access to Markets on the trade.ec Europa website. So it's important to kind of summarize everything we discussed today. You can try and, locate or double check your harmonized codes, your tariff codes, check on Incoterms, understanding the rules of origin, etc. And then seek further assistance from your logistics provider, from your tax advisor, from, whoever is the expert that is helping you, and talk to your client, to your receiver, and their contacts.
Yeah, great. So thanks, Silvia. And Jamie?
Really echo the comment Paul said on prepare and understand. I guess the piece of advice I would give is, if there's something causing you a headache or an additional cost or causing your customers a headache, there's probably something you can do. So we spoke about the fiscal rep and if there's double duties, if you're importing something and then they're paying duty on it and you're having to pay it again back into the EU, there are things you can do to mitigate this. We had a great chat with a client a few days ago, and we reckon we can save £750,000 for him potentially. Plan basically that there are mitigations in place. So speak to your accountants and see if there's anything we can do.
Great, so thanks for that, Victoria.
Yeah, so I would say that if international trade is important enough to your business, or it's a key strategic part of your business, again, echoing everyone else said, plan, prepare, research. I think that now is a good time as well in terms of you know, not being able to physically get out to places, look at, and I'm not just talking within the EU, I'm talking further afield, to gain some market intelligence, research where you want to go and what feels right for you in the future, and keep going. I know it's really tough, and, you know, we're seeing a lot of frustrations and a lot of challenges, but we stick at it, keep going, and make it happen. But like I said, do speak to other people, get as much advice and support as you can. One thing I did want to quickly mention was there was this week the launch of the new SME Brexit support fund by the UK government, and the applications are now open, and that's for SMEs within Great Britain or registered in the UK who would like some extra support, and that can be both training wise or and/or professional advice, and that's grants of up to £2,000 per SME that they can apply for as of this week.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, really good to share that one. Thanks, Victoria. And James.
I've just to reiterate what all the rest of the panelists have said. I mean, I thought I was an expert in regards to import and export, and I've been doing it at the Far East and South America for years. However, the Brexit piece has actually thrown up some more curveballs to me. And I would just say to take where you've got professionals that know it inside out, take and leverage their knowledge. I'm running a business day to day. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not a commodity expert. So where you can leverage the professionals who are eating it day in, day out. Don't try and do it all yourself if you're unsure. If you need advice, take advice.
Yeah, great stuff. So we're going to come to some questions next, but Katie in the background, if you could put up the slide, I think, about the workshop, because I think that's a nice segue into the fact that BHP have put together a number of bits of support for SMEs during this time. And not only can we provide the expert tax advice through Jamie, but we also have shaped up a number of workshops to help SMEs go through what is quite a complex environment. And the most important of those is probably that first one there that we're launching on the 27th of April, a practical guide to the new export environment, where all of the words that you've been hearing today, I know we've got a question coming up about limited fiscal rep, commodity codes, Incoterms, or rules of origin, all of these things will be covered in detail in that workshop in a way that will be tailored for your particular business. We then come on to some of the things that Victoria talked about being clear about what your strategy is around export and how you make sure that you're positioned well for that. And then something around marketing as well. So there's information about these workshops on the BHP website, or if you want to get in touch with Paul or myself, please feel free to do that afterwards and we can give you some more information. We have been working with the West Yorkshire Consortia of Colleges to pull these workshops together, and they have managed to access some government funding for us, which means that we can offer subsidised places on those workshops. So really worthwhile taking a look at those. So that's a little bit of information about their higher performing workplaces initiative, which is backing these workshops. So back to our questions then. We had our first question from Will Bernard. Could James W., so James has been put on the spot here, talk a little bit more about limited fiscal rep? We export pallets, Will saying, to various countries in Europe, and it's a bit like flipping a coin to see if they arrive at the final destination. Can you help?
Okay, so we took the decision to do fiscal rep in Holland based on protecting 6 main partners across Europe. The fiscal rep is an intermediary which will deal with the clearance of your local taxes and duties within within Holland, and then it will supply the consignments under intra-community EC. There is a cost up basis to do that because you will be doing it on a DDP basis, so you will be reliable for the VAT and duty as it clears into Holland, which takes that obligation away from your customer, but it has to route the product all the way through Holland to be able to do that as a fiscal rep. So it all depends. So there's cost up in regards to freight and cost up in regards to clearance, VAT and duty. So you need to balance that with the commercial element of, can you afford to put the price up to your customer, first of all, to cover it, or can you stomach the additional costs? So like I said, we did it to protect our main 6 partners across Europe. But we will analyze it over the next 6 months and see whether it is actually cost viable. We may have to put our prices up to those customers to carry on doing that service. So it's one of those. It's a commercial decision around a technical decision as well.
Yeah. So Paul wants to jump in here. So
yeah, I just wanted to comment, James. I think that's a very full answer. There is, of course, another side to this, and that's the commercial view of do you want to set up a trading sort of entity in the EU and become an importer. Jamie will not to talk about the tax of that, but there's a whole strategic imperative that you can wrap around this about how you want to see your business going forward. And part of the question I think we were touching on earlier is, where is export going? Well, most people would argue that export is a five-year type of investment journey based on a clear strategy, one of which may be setting up entities into countries and becoming an in-country importer. So a slight aside to the answer from James, but something to consider again, because there are many opportunities to consider. But again, it's about advice and what's best on an individual basis. Sorry if I jumped in there.
yeah, no, that's okay. Thanks, Paul, for that. So yeah, just encourage everybody to post some questions in the Q&A if you've got questions for our panelists. And we've got one from Rebecca Willis, who is asking, we have exported for a number of years. Is it okay that I've only just heard about rules of origin? I suspect you're not the only person thinking that, Rebecca, because that's something I thought when I first met these guys. So I think I'm going to go to Victoria for that one.
Yeah, no, it's completely normal, when you've not had to think about it and you've not had to consider it because it's not been part of the business that you're doing. And, let's face it, like I said before, a lot of international trade and exporting comes around accidentally, and it's opportunism, and then you start working with different partners, and even when you become a bit more strategic, a lot of it is based off what your customers are asking you for, the information that they require, and your knowledge is always building. I mean, I'll hold my hands up and say the same. When we started the beginning of this year, the amount, even for someone like myself who is a professional, is an expert, the amount of upskilling I think we've all had to do in the last few months as there's been all of these challenges that have come about is huge. And you're not the only one. And I think that's where, like we've said before, it's challenging enough when you're living and breathing this. I think for people that are international business is part of what you do, but you've got a number of other day-to-day duties, and you're building the business in a number of ways. Being specialist and understanding that aspect of things is, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult. That's where looking at, training, support, advice comes in. Rules of origin is very complex and very difficult. And again, I can't go into the granular detail. I'd just say that from a perspective, an overarching perspective, it's understanding if those, obviously, rules of origin do apply. If they can apply, obviously that's great from an EU trading perspective for in terms of duties and taxes and etc. But every business has to look into that into more detail and have the confidence of where you sit within that, because obviously, again, different industries have different rules and regulations around at what level there can be some element of third party or other components or ingredients within your product, how much transformation they will allow to then allow it to tip into a UK rule of origin product, which will allow preferential treatment or not. So it's a very complex area. So you're not alone in that for sure. And like I say, take advice and speak to as many people as you can on it, and be sure where your stance is from the products or services that you provide.
Thanks for that, Victoria. So as we come towards the end of this seminar, we are going to ask you the poll question again. So we've had a little bit of chat between us as to how big a difference we might have been able to make in just an hour, given some of the complexities that we've been talking about. But I think we're going to give it a whirl and do the poll again, even if it comes out the same answer. I think that would be interesting. So if you could answer the poll again, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'm going to come back to our panelists for one last thought, which is, can you share a brief success story of someone who's doing well at the moment in the export arena? So a business, either you something you're doing inside your own business or one of your clients who is doing well, and what that might mean for our audience. So when the results from the poll come up, they come up quite quickly last time. So I don't know, Katie, if that's possible again. Oh, I don't know. They probably, oh, here we go. Yeah, so we have moved the bar a bit, actually, from people who are towards the bottom into the middle. So, yeah, well done, panel. But clearly still lots of questions to answer, which is kind of back to why we've put together this suite of support for you all. So I'm going to come to our panel for a final thought on a success story that we can end today's seminar with. I'm going to go to Jamie first. It's going to have to be brief because we've only got 5 minutes.
Yeah, so limited numbers of success stories. It's mostly been people stressing and panicking, speaking to me. A client of mine, new client of mine, they repair faulty goods for a large high street chain, help them set up in Ireland so they can continue to trade with the EU businesses seamlessly. That was a real success. It's hopefully going to be a real success once it's all set up. That's mine.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Paul? You're on mute. At least you did it as well as me.
I'm coming off. I just couldn't get there fast enough. Actually, it's remarkably interesting because Jamie covered something I was going to say. It's the whole issue of reverse logistics, and someone that I've been involved with is actually growth in spare parts, actually out, strangely enough, into Ireland, and from Ireland into Europe. Now there's an interesting conundrum, but yes, a real success story for UK goods that are being supported across Europe in a growth manner. So yeah, there we are.
Yeah, so there is opportunity there. Sylvia, have you got one to share with us?
We do quite a lot of art shipments, and mixed with the pandemic and the fact that with art galleries and art retailers, you can move goods also under temporary admission, which is specific formalities in customs, where you suspend the import VAT and duties for a period of time. The e-commerce of those retailers has boomed both during the pandemic and it's currently going really strong. So
yeah, niche market, but an important one because it's
a lot of people are doing their homes also and need some nice art.
Yeah. And James?
Hi there. I'm actually going to say ourselves, actually, based on being really planned and a strategic plan. We've actually picked up 2 new customers in Europe because our competitors didn't plan.
Oh, so good.
So for us, without being gloaty, we've picked up 2 really good clients by being strategically planned for Brexit. So I would say plan, yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. Victoria, and then we've got one last question to answer before we close off. So Victoria.
Yeah, so one of the clients that we've worked with, which are quite a large business in the bakery category, has been doing really well. As I mentioned before, we've seen a lot of stockpiling, which was normal pre the deadline, and then we didn't expect that sales would probably pick up quite as quickly as they did after the 1st of Jan, and the orders have been much bigger and than we would have anticipated. So we're actually enjoying a lot of volume increase and obviously revenue increase at this stage. So that's been really positive.
Great stuff. I think I know who that bakery client is as well. So that's a great story. So before we close off today, we've got one last question from Michael Rippon. He's asking, what's the impact on a business of not getting customs duty correct? So I think...
Shall I dive on that one?
Please do.
If you don't, well, for UK business, you get it wrong, HMRC may investigate and ultimately assess for any back taxes and potentially interest and penalties if you're shown to be showing undue care or you're deliberately dodging tax. So basically the underpaid tax plus potentially 100% of that again if you're doing things deliberately and concealing it.
Yeah, so worth spending some time getting it right. So Katie, if you could just flash up the workshop once more, I'm going to say a massive thank you to our panelists. I've learned so much from you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation as well. We've enjoyed sort of getting together ahead of this seminar, and I can tell you all that they're very, very passionate people. They were even having a debate in the chat whilst the seminar was going on about some of these issues. So this is a really high quality panel. Don't forget the workshops are available if you've still got questions. Please do talk to Paul, or go to the BHP website to learn more about that. We're also going to send an email out with a link to that. But thanks very much, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.